What would you do if you woke up 25,000 years ago on the frozen steppes of what is now Ukraine, where the temperature has plummeted to -40 degrees Fahrenheit? Howling winds rip across the barren landscape, carrying sheets of ice and snow that sting like needles against exposed skin. There are no grocery stores, no heated homes, no winter coats from Ray. Your modern smartphone would be dead within minutes. Your car wouldn't start. Most modern humans, even with all their outdoor gear and survival knowledge, would die within hours in these conditions. Yet somehow, your ancient ancestors not only survived in this frozen nightmare, they thrived. They raised children who grew into healthy adults. They created breathtaking art that still captivates us today. They built communities that lasted for generations, gathering around fires to tell stories, make tools, and plan for tomorrow. How is that even possible? The answer reveals one of humanity's greatest untold stories. The invention of technology so ingenious that modern Arctic engineers still study them today, scratching their heads in admiration at what people accomplished with nothing but stone tools and brilliant minds. When temperatures regularly drop to deadly levels, the solution isn't always to build up. Sometimes it's to dig down. Archaeological evidence from Kostenki, Russia, shows that ancient people discovered something remarkable about 25,000 years ago. In this frigid landscape, where winter lasted 6 months and summer was barely a warm breath, they built circular structures using the bones of at least 60 woolly mammoths. But these mammoth bone houses weren't just piled on the surface like a child's fort. The oldest pit dwellings discovered in Prehistoric, Ukraine, dating back 15,000 years, reveal a sophisticated understanding of thermal physics that would make a modern engineer jealous. These ancient builders created bases that were circular or oval, measuring 12 to 14 feet in diameter. They used massive bones for walls and lighter bones for roofs, then stretched animal hide around the entire exterior for insulation. But here's where it gets really clever, where you can almost see the moment of genius that changed everything. By digging 6 to 8 feet below the surface, Ice Age builders accessed the Earth's natural heating system. At that depth, soil temperatures stay relatively stable year-round, hovering about 20 to 30 degrees warmer than the freezing air above. The Earth itself became a thermal battery, storing and releasing heat to keep inhabitants alive through the darkest, coldest months. Think about it for a moment. These were people with stone tools, no formal education, no YouTube tutorials on how to build your first underground house. They were creating engineering solutions based on principles that wouldn't be formally understood for thousands of years. They were the world's first geothermal engineers, figuring out through observation and experimentation exactly how deep to dig for maximum warmth while avoiding the back-breaking labor of going deeper than necessary. But understanding the right depth was only the beginning of their genius. They also had to solve a problem that would kill anyone who got it wrong, preventing these underground homes from turning into frozen graves or, perhaps worse, damp caves where moisture would freeze on the walls and make the shelter uninhabitable. The mammoth bone structures of Eastern Europe represent some of the most sophisticated prehistoric architecture ever discovered. And calling them primitive is like calling a smartphone a fancy calculator. These weren't crude shelters hastily thrown together when the snow started falling. They were engineered buildings designed with multiple interlocking systems that had to work together perfectly or everyone inside would die. The structure at Kostenki was 40 feet in diameter. Imagine a circle as wide as a 2-story house is tall, and researchers estimate that building it would have been incredibly time-consuming. This suggests it was meant to last, perhaps serving as a landmark where multiple families could gather, or a meeting place where knowledge could be shared and relationships built. Construction required collecting hundreds of bones from long-dead mammoths. These builders had to find skulls weighing over 200 pounds each, curved tusks perfect for creating the dome-shaped framework, and smaller bones to fill gaps and provide structural support. Radiocarbon dating shows that many of these bones came from mammoths that had died long before, meaning the builders were systematically collecting materials from bone yards rather than hunting specifically for construction materials. They were recyclers before recycling was recognized practical. These people understood that nature provided what they needed if they were smart enough to look for it. But the real innovation, the thing that separates these structures from simple bone piles, was in the layers. Ice Age builders created composite insulation systems that wouldn't be seen again until modern times, when scientists with advanced degrees would discover the same principles. The innermost layer consisted of carefully prepared animal hides with the fur side facing inward, creating dead air spaces that trapped warm air against the occupants' bodies. The middle layer was dried grass and moss that served a crucial dual purpose. It provided additional insulation while also wicking moisture away from the interior. This was critical because wet insulation doesn't work. It's worse than useless, actually conducting heat away from the body rather than trapping it. The outermost layer used woven mats made from reeds and bark, creating a wind-resistant shell that also allowed moisture to escape, preventing the deadly problem of condensation. When warm breath meets cold walls, moisture condenses and freezes, making shelters uninhabitable and potentially deadly. Ice Age engineers solved this 25,000 years before anyone understood the science of dew points and vapor barriers. They also figured out sophisticated ventilation systems that would make a modern HVAC engineer nod with respect. Small openings near ground level allowed fresh air to enter, while larger openings near the top let warm, moist air escape. The positioning created natural convection currents that maintained air quality while preserving precious heat. Some sites even show evidence of adjustable ventilation systems with bone and hide flaps that could be opened or closed depending on weather conditions. It was ancient climate control, responsive and efficient. Around 30,000 years ago, something revolutionary happened that would change human survival forever. Anthropologist Brian Fagan argues that this invention was the most important in human history, more significant than the wheel or even fire, because it enabled humans to survive in places where they simply couldn't exist before. Someone, somewhere, carved the first needle from ivory or bone, boring a tiny eye through it with a fine-pointed flint drill. These Ice Age needles would be instantly recognizable today. You could pick one up and thread it and get to work if you needed to. Before needles existed, humans draped themselves in loose animal hides. These provided some protection, better than nothing certainly, but they were inadequate for serious cold. The hides would flap open in the wind, allowing heat to escape. Snow and moisture could get inside. It was like wearing a blanket instead of a coat. But needles changed everything. Suddenly, humans could create fitted, layered clothing that actually kept them warm. Figurines discovered in Siberia dating back 24,000 years depict people wearing furry, hooded outfits that look remarkably like modern parkas. Bone needles and pelt scrapers have been found at ancient campsites, along with the bones of rabbits, foxes, mink, and wolverines, all animals whose fur would have made excellent cold-weather clothing. Ice Age tailors developed a sophisticated understanding of materials and layering that modern outdoor gear companies would later rediscover and sell for hundreds of dollars per item. They would carefully select different animal skins based on their specific properties: reindeer hide for durability and warmth, Arctic fox fur for insulation, hair pelts for lightweight inner layers. Even birds like ptarmigans contributed feathers and down for ultralight insulation. These tailors would then sew together 3 or 4 layers, creating moisture-wicking underwear, insulating mid-layers, and waterproof outer shells that protected against wind and precipitation. Thread was made from wild flax and other vegetable fibers, sometimes even dyed different colors like turquoise and pink, suggesting that even in the depths of the Ice Age, humans cared about looking good while staying warm. The difference between fitted and loose clothing was literally life or death, and it may have determined which human species survived and which went extinct. Studies suggest that Neanderthals did not use fitted clothing or used it less effectively than modern humans, likely wearing cape-like apparel that left them vulnerable to frostbite and hypothermia. Our ability to sew better clothing may have given us the crucial edge in survival, allowing us to hunt longer, travel farther, and endure more extreme conditions than our evolutionary cousins could manage. But clothing and shelter, as sophisticated as they were, still left one enormous problem. How do you generate enough heat inside these structures to actually keep people alive? And what do you burn for fuel when there are no trees on the frozen steppes? Just endless windswept plains where nothing grows taller than grass. Ice Age peoples developed techniques that seem almost desperate at first glance, but reveal deep understanding when you look closer. They learned to burn mammoth dung, dried grasses, and even bones as fuel. Chemical analysis of ancient hearth residues shows these materials were processed and prepared to maximize burn efficiency and heat output. Imagine the experimentation required to figure out the best fuel mixtures, the right moisture content for grass, the preparation techniques that made bones burn hotter and longer. This was sophisticated material science conducted by trial and error, where mistakes can mean the difference between a warm shelter and a frozen death. Fuel management was only part of the heating solution, though. These shelters featured multiple hearth systems designed to maximize heat distribution while minimizing fuel consumption. A central hearth provided the main heat source, its fire reflecting off the bones and earth walls to heat the entire interior space. Smaller heating stations were positioned around the perimeter, creating warm zones for specific activities like food preparation, tool making, and probably socializing on the coldest nights when going outside wasn't an option and the family needed somewhere to gather. The positioning of sleeping areas reveals something beautiful about Ice Age society. Archaeological evidence shows that the warmest spots near central hearths were reserved for infants and elderly family members, the people most vulnerable to cold and least able to generate their own body heat. This wasn't random sleeping arrangements or survival of the fittest. It was deliberate social engineering that valued all members of the community, protecting the vulnerable through thoughtful design and shared warmth. Young, healthy adults slept in the cooler outer areas, using their robust metabolisms to stay warm while giving the best spots to those who needed them most. Storage was another brilliant innovation that turned a deadly challenge into an advantage. In permafrost regions where the ground stays frozen year-round, Ice Age peoples learned to use natural freezing as a preservation method. They created underground storage chambers connected to their winter shelters by short tunnels, essentially building walk-in freezers 25,000 years before electricity was invented. These natural refrigerators kept meat fresh throughout the winter while remaining accessible even during severe storms. When a blizzard raged outside, making hunting impossible, families could safely access stored food without ever leaving their shelter. They turned the deadly cold into a survival tool, the ultimate example of making nature work for you instead of against you. Building a mammoth bone house wasn't a weekend project you tackled when the weather looked nice. Experimental archaeology, where modern people try to recreate ancient techniques, suggests construction required 2 to 3 weeks of intensive work by 8 to 10 adults. This meant planning months in advance, a level of foresight and organization that shatters any notion of Ice Age people as simple-minded or reactive. Construction had to be completed well before winter made outdoor work impossible, which means these communities were thinking and planning across seasons, coordinating labor, managing resources, and executing complex multi-month survival strategies. Tool marks and seasonal indicators preserved in the archaeological record suggest most winter shelters were built during late summer and early autumn. These weren't people scrambling for shelter when the first snow fell. They were strategic planners who understood their environment so well they could predict when conditions would become dangerous and prepare accordingly. And their work didn't end once the shelter was complete. Throughout winter, occupants regularly repaired and upgraded their structures as they lived in them. Broken bones were replaced, damaged hide coverings were patched, insulation materials were refreshed when they settled or degraded. This wasn't just reactive maintenance, fixing things when they broke. It was proactive engineering that improved shelter performance over time, making each structure warmer and more efficient with each passing season. Here's where this ancient history becomes intensely relevant to your life right now, today, in 2025. These Ice Age survival strategies aren't just historical curiosities gathering dust in museums. They're quietly revolutionizing modern construction around the world, solving problems that affect millions of people. Walk into certain modern buildings in Alaska, northern Canada, Iceland, or Scandinavia, and you're experiencing Ice Age technology translated into contemporary materials. Earth sheltering as a construction method dates back to 15,000 BC, when migratory hunters in Europe used turf and earth to insulate round huts partially sunk into the ground. Today, approximately 10 million people live in underground homes in northern China, taking advantage of the same thermal principles Ice Age builders discovered. Notable examples include Swiss architect Peter Vetsch's earth houses, with about 50 such structures built in Switzerland alone, including residential estates where entire communities live partially underground. These modern earth-sheltered homes use the exact same principles Ice Age builders discovered through experimentation and necessity. The Earth's stable temperature provides natural insulation, reducing heating and cooling costs by up to 80% compared to conventional above-ground construction. Studies show that earth-sheltered houses are most cost-effective in climates with significant temperature extremes and low humidity. Places like the Rocky Mountains and northern Great Plains, where earth temperatures vary much less than air temperatures throughout the year. If you've ever visited Alaska or northern Canada, you might have noticed something odd about building entrances. There's often a small room between the outside door and the inside door, a space that seems redundant until you experience it in winter. This is called an Arctic entry, and it's a direct descendant of the Ice Age entrance tunnel. An Arctic entry is an in-between room that serves as an entryway where people can remove layers of clothing and boots without letting frigid air rush directly into the heated living space. It helps keep warm air in the house rather than dumping it outside every time someone opens the door. In Alaska and northern Canada, this design is standard in residential and commercial construction, a 25,000-year-old solution to a timeless problem, proving itself valuable enough to be required by building codes in extreme climates. Korean ondol floor heating systems and Russian masonry stoves are direct descendants of Ice Age hearth technology, using thermal mass to absorb heat from fires and slowly release it over hours or even days. The triple-layer insulation system of Ice Age shelters, vapor barrier, insulation layer, weather barrier, is now standard in building codes worldwide, from suburban homes in Texas to apartment buildings in New York. Materials are good thermal insulators because they do not let heat travel through them easily, and synthetic clothes made to withstand extreme weather use the same heat trapping techniques that Ice Age tailors discovered when they layered different animal skins. We're still using the same principles our ancestors figured out, just with fiberglass instead of moss and Gore-Tex instead of reindeer hide. Root cellars, wine caves, and modern food storage facilities all use the Earth's stable temperature for preservation, exactly as Ice Age peoples did 25,000 years ago when they dug storage chambers connected to their winter homes. Every time you eat food that's been cold stored, you're benefiting from Ice Age innovation. Here's something sobering that should make you appreciate how close we came to losing all this knowledge forever. As climates warmed at the end of the Ice Age about 12,000 years ago, the need for extreme cold weather shelters diminished. Forests expanded across Europe and Asia, making timber construction easier and more practical than building with mammoth bones or digging into the earth. The sophisticated techniques for building semi-subterranean dwellings and creating multi-layer insulation systems were gradually forgotten, surviving only in a few Arctic regions where environmental conditions remained challenging enough to require them. For thousands of years, this knowledge existed only in scattered communities around the world, maintained by indigenous peoples who never stopped living in places where these techniques remained necessary. Then the 1973 oil crisis hit. Oil prices skyrocketed, bringing vast social, economic, and political changes worldwide. Combined with growing interest in alternative lifestyles and the Back to the Land movement, people in the United States and elsewhere suddenly became very interested in saving energy and protecting the environment. Government-funded studies, pamphlets, magazines, and books flooded the consumer market, touting the benefits of earth-sheltered design. Archaeologists studying Ice Age sites for entirely different reasons suddenly realized these weren't primitive structures built by people who didn't know any better. They were masterpieces of thermal engineering created by brilliant problem solvers who understood their environment at a deep, intuitive level. Today, military Arctic training programs teach shelter building methods directly derived from archaeological reconstructions of Ice Age designs. Disaster relief organizations have adapted these ancient techniques for emergency shelter construction in extreme environments, from earthquake zones to refugee camps in harsh climates. The Ice Age survival story matters for your future in three crucial ways that you need to understand. First, as global temperatures become more extreme and unpredictable, Ice Age building techniques offer proven solutions for both extreme cold and heat. Earth-sheltered construction works just as well in deserts as in tundra because the Earth's stable temperature protects against both extremes. Second, with energy costs rising and climate change accelerating, buildings that require minimal heating and cooling aren't luxuries or hippie experiments. They're necessities for sustainable living. Ice Age architects figured out passive climate control 25,000 years ago, and were finally smart enough to learn from them. Third, and perhaps most importantly, this story reminds us that humans are remarkably adaptable when we need to be. Faced with conditions that should have been impossible to survive, conditions that would kill most modern humans, despite all our technology and knowledge, our ancestors didn't retreat to warmer climates. They didn't give up. They innovated, experimented, cooperated, and ultimately transformed deadly environments into homes where children could be born and grow up safe. Every time you experience modern comfort in extreme weather, whether it's a heated home in Alaska, an earth-sheltered house in the Rockies, or even just a well-insulated apartment during a polar vortex, you're benefiting from Ice Age innovation. The next time you walk through an airlock entrance on a freezing day, pausing in that strange in-between room to shake snow off your coat before entering the warm interior, remember you're using a 25,000-year-old design. When you adjust your thermostat or marvel at how well your house maintains temperature, think about the Mammoth bone house builders who achieved similar results with carefully positioned fires and strategic architecture. When architects and engineers design the latest cutting-edge sustainable building, remember that the principles behind it were first developed by families with stone tools, facing winters that would kill most of us within hours. Those Ice Age engineers weren't primitive in any meaningful sense of the word. They were brilliant problem solvers who understood thermodynamics, material science, and human needs at a fundamental level that put them on par with modern engineers. They built structures so thermally efficient that modern Arctic engineers study them for inspiration, often finding that Ice Age designs outperform contemporary structures when tested under extreme conditions. Their legacy shines through in every energy-efficient building, cozy earth-sheltered home, and whenever we find warmth against nature's challenges. We didn't just survive the Ice Age, we learned lessons that might help us survive our current, and future climate challenges, whether those involve extreme cold, extreme heat, or the kind of temperature swings that make conventional construction inefficient and expensive. The most impressive part that should make you stop and really think about is what humans are capable of when necessity demands. They figured it all out without computers, without textbooks, without written language, without the accumulated scientific knowledge we take for granted. Just observation, experimentation, cooperation, and the absolute necessity of getting it right because failure meant death for you and everyone you loved. That's not primitive. That's genius. That's humanity at its most resilient, creative, and remarkable. And that's the legacy we carry forward every time we build shelter against the elements, proving once again that the best solutions to our problems often come from learning from those who faced similar challenges before us and had the brilliance to overcome them.